we have a conversation internally about security versus usability. Where's the line goes? You can tight everything, nobody can do anything, but then your business won't run. But I think those are good, healthy conversation to have to decide, how you set your risk management tolerance, everything around it, because that's really what it means. You can have all sorts of automation, everything, but if you don't have any tolerance and understanding exactly how far you can take things, it will be very difficult. So we have Chat GPT right now. We have people logging on and uploading things to it. So that's another thing, which we know is our IP and is moving in there. So there's things that you can't control. Simple as that, policy or not.
So we focus on classifying our data before we put it in the cloud. Now we have the situation where people get credit cards and put whatever they want in the cloud, and we try and put controls around that. But we don't put our most sensitive data into the cloud for a reason. I'm curious what other people do and what you do when you are attacked.
We do have some utilization of encryption for certain type of data that we're not saying they are personal data or anything, but we deemed they are our IP in some ways, and we want to protect them. Those type of data we have used basically an encryption model for encrypting that environment. Now, the downside of it is that when you access it, is a little bit of a hard time to, but we have some work around it because most of it is in our software development lifecycle. We automated many things, and then we added some of that data specifically to be used and encrypted in there. So we use that for, let's call it a critical 1 or 2 or 3, whatever category you want to call it, and that's how we do it on our side. I don't know about others, but that's mostly for the IPs we have created ourselves.
How we did it was, first, I agreed to Melissa that we did the data classification. I think that was based on the application. Where is the data going to be stored? Is it on-prem versus cloud? And we determined that first. I think then afterwards, what we try to determine is, what is it, the resiliency of this particular data as well? How are we going to recover from an attack if that was to happen, or from a ransomware if that was to happen? So what is the strategy to recover this data set, and how are we going to do it, and in what time we're going to do it? So your RTO, RPO comes into effect as well. Your immutable backups, your encryption, all that comes into play. Because if you're saying this particular data set is going to survive my business in the event of a ransomware attack, how do I recover it, and how to recover the system for the business to operate in? Because scalability was a key core component for you, but it's also a component is the recoverability as well, right? Because otherwise business is not going to run at any point in time. So I would say, I think the way another point I would add is, when we were kind of going and building that cyber strategy, we looked at the plan, which was the strategy and the roadmap, and the protect. What are the tools? What are the processes? What we're going to need? But I think what we wanted to do as part of the whole data recovery piece was, how do we prepare our teams, and how do we practice that recovery? And that became a core component of going to the business saying, you need to now reinvest, because we think that these two pieces lack significantly on the recovery portion of that particular data.
And it is an investment, because I think you're re-architecting your entire replication strategy, right? Once you start moving to the cloud, and that's costly. And there's not a complete understanding at the executive level as to what that means, what the risks are, how it's going to protect you, and then getting to the board and getting there. I mean, they recognize the risk factor of it, but it can be significant.
So there is one more thing out there, cyber insurance. So if you want to get your insurance right, and there are companies, they don't even insure you anymore.
A lot of them are
out. And there are only a handful of cyber insurance companies actually are into that, to saying we want to insure you. One, you shouldn't have any incident, just like a car accident. If you don't have it, and you get forgiveness. If you do have incident, you have to be openly saying it, that you did. The other is, this data classification you refer to, we actually did that because you can't, say we did classify our data in very specifics. But insurance are very specific what they insure and what they don't. So if you do specifically doing your data IP that you own and it has a value to you, because we buy also data from elsewhere, they have no value for us because it's somebody else's data. But the data that values, that's where the insurance goes very high. And if you have some sort of encryption around it, then you'll be able to reduce your actual insurance to much lower. It's a big spend in any organization who truly have gone out and insured themselves, because some people are extremely underinsured, and cyber attacks does happen. Believe me, and it happens all the time. Majority of people won't even say they've been hacked. Most people, they don't even need to know that they, But when incident happen, insurance will cut you off, and that's what you don't want to happen, because when incident happens, you want to use your insurance.
Is there enough insurance? I mean, one instance and that's it. You can't get it. You will not get insurance again. But can you even get enough insurance to cover
So
the
I signed
cost
my
and
last
the
week.
reputational law,
Yeah.
the reputational situation? Like, there are so many other factors that it's great if you get some payment,
Yeah.
but the effects of it are so long lasting. Is it a worthwhile investment?
Well, and how do you figure out what enough is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
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 Even if you can get it.
I've been through an incident also, but obviously there's the things that you can learn to apply from a systematic and people. But I go back to Dan's point. The people is the real one you got to watch for.
Absolutely.
But the one thing we try and do now is also from a business executive team. How much do they understand? How do we act going through the process? One organization I've been through, we had no idea what to do from a business standpoint. So now we practice this. The organization I'm at now. Well, what do? We go through this scenario. Let's go through all the different scenarios. How do we be ready for it? Done it a couple times this year. We've already learned a lot about ourselves.
Yeah, I find that's the biggest question I get from the CEO and the executive. What do I do? What do I do in each instance, right? And it's almost like building your own murder mystery or what have you. Here's your script. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Or you're going to get these two paths. Which one do you take? And how do you get to the next level?
I want to pick on a word that you said, which is practice, right? And you don't want to be testing your processes in a crisis. So you have to have enough of those simulations, and we're all very good at doing it within the IT team, but I think you really need to involve the larger enterprise, whether that's communication, operation, to make sure that their business continuity plans are ready as well.
I think it comes down to, we talked about having good, rock solid internal processes in place. And two other things, I don't know if somebody's looked into it or not, is, are you also looking at data vault as part of extension of your backup strategy itself too? And that can be also on-prem or cloud, whatever you decide is going to fit into your model too. And I believe the security is also like a brick, which has multiple layers of Swiss cheese. Every time you put something in, you're putting another layer on it. It's still soft. It's penetrable, but you put so many layers on it that the bad actor is saying, what the hell with these guys? They're making my life hard. I'm moving on to something else. At the end of the day, we're all guinea pigs. If somebody wants to take you out, they will take you out. So there's nothing guaranteed 100% itself to it. How do you make their life hard enough so they go somewhere else? That's the end game itself too. And some of the things is why look at some of your strategy pieces after an incident, and why not be a little bit proactive? And I think the tabletop exercises are a must, where everyone in the business, not just IT folks, business is at the table. Business try to run away from those, right? They don't want to spend time. I know how many times they cancel. No, we're not available. How with you? You need to show up, right? So I think those tabletop acts are extremely important. So when you are not under stress, you're still struggling with making decisions. And how are you going to make decisions when it really happens? So those processes have to be tested up front, because you're also running against a clock at that time, right? And so those are the pieces you want to do a lot of due diligence.
It's a good example of moving away from protection to resilience, and that's exactly what we did. We refocused our time and energy from ensuring that bad actors don't get into our environment to say, how do we ensure when an event does occur, in the 70% that'll be true, that I still have accessibility to the data. So the ransom is use of data. The ransom isn't giving the data back. So now I ensuring that I have my data at all times. And if I do or do not pay, it's because they choose to put it out in the public for some reason. So therefore, things like process, as you're saying, Peter, or knowing that I'm refocusing my time on internal actors versus external actors, because those events that occur will likely occur with my productivity tools, right? Sharing in docs than they are, external penetration into my actual software. So resilience is where we spend 80% of our cyber time, not protection.
Thing that I see is that companies aren't protecting their data as they should. So we talk about that resilience approach, and it's really slow adoption. I find I speak to customers that still don't have proper ransomware recovery processes in place. And, I remember seeing a white paper from 2014 that talked about, we're giving up on just focusing on proactive, and we're going to move to that whole, before, during, after approach and assume that we can't protect against being hacked. But we still have customers that are not putting that protection in place, which is really astounding to me. First of all, one of the things that I see that I find surprising is that very often when the risks around the data are being assessed, they're being assessed by IT. So first around that proper categorization of the importance of that data, and the businesses themselves are not really understanding things like RPO and RTO and recoverability. And that's really important to them. So first of all, they should need to understand the importance of the data that they're trying to protect, and then understand how the security landscape is constantly changing. So you need to constantly keep on evolving that and keep up with current practices.
Having survived 2 near cybersecurity disasters, I'll add this to the conversation. Make sure that you have on speed dial and you've established relationships ahead of time. Number 1, third-party breach counsel, because that's usually your first call. Number 2, the FBI or the RCMP, because that's usually the second call. All your cybersecurity vendors, because they will really, put a huge effort in if you're really under threat. And an independent forensics agency has to be an independent forensics agency, because the first thing you got to do is perform the forensic to figure out what the hell happened. And so the first time we had one of these near misses, we didn't have any, we did the tabletop and all that jazz. We didn't have the people that you really need on speed dial arranged and relationships established. So I would recommend you do that. Toot sweet.
I wholeheartedly agree. One, you should also call your cyber insurance.
Well, we decided not to. Our cybersecurity premiums have quintupled in 3 years, and we just decided that whoever's in the insurance business, we're just self-insured. It's just too expensive, and it took like 4 months to go through the process of answering 1 million questionnaires. It's just too expensive. Self-insured.
Make sure you encrypt your backups. Encrypt your backups every day and put it on a separate VLAN that you do not have any non-production server on VLAN. Separate it out from your network so you can access during the emergency times. So that's a happy path.
Yeah. So maybe I can broaden on that a little bit, right? So, Gurvinder, you talked about encryption, right? We're talking about immutable storage or immutable backup. You're talking about having an air gap solution, nothing else, no production, nothing, right? That's part of it. Paul, you talked about resiliency, right? Paul, you talked about having those, the resources that are needed on speed dial. And that's how the other thing is training. And I want to talk about that a little bit. The organizations that we work with are taking these components. I don't think that I've talked to anyone that's said that all of these things are being addressed, right? So that is, I think, what organizations are trying to get to. That's what they need to get to. The training piece of it that was touched on, right? Like, you need to make sure that your people, your personnel have experience with dealing with this. It might not be real world, but one of the things that a conversation I had with some senior leaders over dinner a while ago was one of the individuals said, one of the impacts that we didn't expect was the impact on our people, right? The amount of pressure that was placed on them to recover, to address the situations that are at hand. We have people standing up, walking out and saying, I'm done. Yeah, I think you touched on scarcity of resources. How do you backfill for that? So, sorry, I might have gone a little bit broader, but from a technology perspective, I think we've touched on that. Gurvinder, you touched on it. An air gap, immutable. Everything's encrypted. Everything's encrypted often. We're training for it. We understand the inevitability of the situation. It's going to hit all of us at some point, right? Some worse than others, but it's this preparedness. It's, Paul, you mentioned that 80% of your resources, 80% of your time is being spent on resiliency, not so much prevention. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are going, acknowledging the fact that this is an inevitability and we need to focus on what happens after. What are we going to do to bring ourselves back?